They were just 15 hours away from handing me my $2.4 million pension. 15 hours. Instead, at exactly 6 p.m., my employee badge chirped once against the reader. Beep. Access denied. I did not ask questions. I did not argue. I did not even flinch. I turned, walked down the corridor I had helped design during our last expansion, and passed by the glass conference rooms I had once filled with strategic plans, ethics compliance briefs, and difficult conversations no one else had the courage to lead. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. My name is Lyra Penn. I am 45 years old, and until yesterday, I was the Chief Compliance Officer at Veriton Equity Partners, a global private equity firm headquartered in downtown Marston Hill. For 21 years, I ensured that what we built did not collapse under the weight of its own ambition. I was not the face of the company, but I was the backbone. And they knew it, which is why, when they decided to terminate me, they did not do it in the light of day. They did it at exactly 6 p.m., long after legal had left and before anything could vest. They thought they were being clever, precise, silent, but they forgot who I was. The woman they fired had quietly been building the very foundation of accountability they were now trying to bury me beneath. As I stepped out of the glass elevator and into the empty lobby, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Not yet. Only a strange, surgical silence. Security was waiting, one of the younger guys I had barely spoken to. He looked nervous. I handed over my company phone, laptop, and badge. May I ask why? I asked him calmly. He did not answer. He just handed me an envelope marked confidential and gestured to the revolving doors. The sun had just dipped behind the skyline. A perfect late autumn dusk, the kind where everything is gold and steel. It should have felt like an ending. It did not. Inside my car, I opened the envelope. It contained a formal termination letter and a severance agreement. 6 months of salary. A full waiver of all remaining retirement claims. A line about confidentiality. I skimmed it once, closed it, and placed it gently on the passenger seat. By the time the office lights turned off behind me, I had already started calculating. They thought I would walk away quietly. They thought I would vanish like so many before me. But I had not spent 21 years building blind trust. I had spent 21 years watching, recording, documenting. And in the past 9 months, ever since a certain decision at the executive level, I had been building something else entirely. Insurance. It started when I noticed discrepancies in the Q2 audit. Subtle shifts in asset evaluations. Lines buried in the footnotes. I raised it, of course. I always raised it. But this time, I was told in not so many words to let it go. That we were positioning for acquisition and clean books were essential to market confidence. I knew what that meant. So, I did what they did not expect. I did not protest. I documented. I started archiving internal communications, printing emails, gathering backup files. I saved everything to an encrypted drive they did not know existed. I consulted a whistleblower attorney. Quietly, discreetly. I asked all the right hypothetical questions. I gathered precedents, regulations, and risk metrics. And then I waited. I waited for them to make their move. And now they had. They had fired me 15 hours before my pension vested. The timing was not just insulting, it was coordinated. Someone inside legal had mapped this out to the minute. The real cost of letting me vest versus the benefit of removal. They had made a decision. But what they did not account for, what they never account for, is what happens when the person you think you are burying already dug the tunnel out. At 7:12 p.m., I emailed a digital file packet to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. It contained over 9 months of documentation detailing how Veriton had artificially inflated its valuation by using layered investment vehicles to hide capital exposure and manipulate the balance sheet. It also contained internal memos about client fund allocations, side agreements not disclosed to our audit committee, and conversations from closed-door meetings that had conveniently never made it into the minutes. At 8:04 p.m., I sent a separate, simplified summary to 3 of our institutional clients, the ones most likely to understand the gravity of what I had uncovered. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Veriton's valuation had dropped $1.1 billion. I watched it unfold from the quiet of my kitchen, coffee in hand, eyes locked on the market feed. I watched as the stock fell like glass through concrete, shattering under the weight of exposure. News outlets picked it up quickly. Whistleblower allegations rock Veriton Equity Partners. Regulatory review triggered by sudden executive exit. Unvested pensions sparks retaliation claims. I watched the press conference live stream, too. Bryce Langford, our smooth-talking, board-appointed CEO, stood under the weight of scrutiny he had never trained for. His tie slightly askew, his voice shaky despite his carefully practiced words. Behind him, the general counsel looked like he had not slept. They had fired me to protect a lie. But I had told the truth. Not all of it. Not yet. Only enough to show them that I could. The rest was leverage. I did not want to destroy Veriton. I wanted accountability. I wanted truth. But more than that, I wanted them to understand that this was not about vengeance. It was about balance. And balance comes due one way or another. The phone started ringing at 10:37 a.m. First, it was someone from HR. Then someone from the board. Then a lawyer whose voice I recognized but name I did not. I let it all go to voicemail. I was not in a rush. Let them stew. Let them understand what it feels like to lose control. I knew this was only the beginning. There would be calls, meetings, legal gymnastics. There would be attempts to discredit me, offers dressed as apologies, and a media team scrambling to reshape the narrative. But none of that mattered, because I had waited too long, worked too hard, and seen too much to be silenced now. I was not just the woman they tried to erase. The first person I finally answered wasn't a lawyer, a PR specialist, or anyone from the board. It was Celine. She had been my executive assistant for the last 8 years. Smart, composed, impossible to shake. The kind of person who notices when you're using your stress pen instead of your regular one. She called from her personal phone, not her office line. When I picked up, she said just one thing. They're panicking. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. Her voice said enough. It wasn't panic over stock numbers. They expected turbulence. It wasn't about reputational damage. They thought they could spin it. What rattled them was that they didn't know what else I had. That was the point. Take your emergency file out of the drawer, I said to her. The one in the manila envelope. Burn it. Today. She hesitated. Lyra. Celine. Burn it. She let out a breath. Done. We hung up. That was the last call I took for the rest of the day. Instead, I took a walk. I didn't go far. Just around the lake trail near my apartment. The same one I'd circled countless times when I was trying to decide whether to leave Veriton voluntarily, whether to stay and fight, or whether to just keep playing the game until retirement made it moot. 15 hours. That was all they'd taken from me. But that number stuck in people's minds. It told a story that didn't need embellishment. A woman devoted 2 decades to a firm and was fired mere hours before a life-changing benefit kicked in. No matter how well their legal team framed it, no matter what jargon they wrapped it in, the public knew exactly what that meant. It meant betrayal. And betrayal always finds an audience. By late afternoon, I was getting press inquiries forwarded from my whistleblower counsel. Financial blogs. News wires. One national outlet that smelled blood. I said nothing. I wasn't ready to speak publicly, not yet. Instead, I sat at my desk and opened the drive again. The archive. Because while what I had sent to the SEC was enough to trigger a reaction, it was barely the top layer. There were still 3 flagged files they didn't know existed, documents I'd only ever saved to a hard drive not connected to any network. A file marked Halden Acquisition, internal contained proof that the valuation model used during that merger had omitted 2 significant liabilities. One was an outstanding environmental compliance issue that would cost millions in penalties. The other was more serious. It was regulatory fraud. We had overreported Halden's earnings to inflate our deal optics. Bryce had signed off on the language. So had 2 members of the board. It was covered in layers of legalese, but I knew how to read it. And I had printed the emails where they discussed it off record. Those files weren't just insurance. They were leverage. Because I wasn't naive. The company wouldn't crumble on ethics alone. People don't resign because they feel bad. They resign when the math makes it the best option. I'd given the SEC just enough to shake the walls. What I had now could bring them down. I just had to decide, what did I want? At 6:32 p.m., exactly 24 hours after I was fired, I received a call from Eleanor Hark. She was the chair of the board.
Calm. Sharp.
One of the few people I'd respected inside Veriton. She had voted against my termination. I knew that, though she never said it out loud. Her voice was different from the others. Not panicked. Not rehearsed. Measured. "Lyra," she said. "I want to talk. Not as part of the executive team. Just you and me." I didn't answer right away. "I won't insult you by pretending this didn't happen the wrong way," she continued. "I wasn't in that room. And I told them, clearly, that what they were doing would backfire." I waited. "What do you want, Lyra?" A simple question. But I didn't know the answer. Not fully. Not yet. I wanted my pension, yes. I wanted public acknowledgement of what they'd done to me. I wanted ethical reckoning. But more than that, I wanted to control the outcome. To make sure it didn't happen to the next woman who gave her life to a company only to be replaced by a spreadsheet. "Not over the phone," I finally said. "I assumed that," Eleanor replied. "There's a quiet room at Ravin and Pike's offices. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. No cameras. No lawyers. Just you, me, and one neutral party." I considered. "All right. Lyra," she said before hanging up, her tone changing ever so slightly. "Thank you for not going scorched earth." "I didn't do this to destroy Veriton," I replied. "But if it keeps choosing the wrong things, I won't stop it from destroying itself." She didn't say anything after that. The line went dead. The next morning, I arrived 5 minutes early. The room was exactly what she'd promised: neutral, clean, high-rise views, and no recording devices in sight. She was already seated. Across from her sat a man in his 50s, whom she introduced only as Martin, a retired arbitrator, not on anyone's payroll. She opened with a question. "Would you consider returning?" I blinked. "Excuse me? Not in the same role. I'm proposing you return as interim chief executive officer. Bryce has already offered his resignation. The board will accept it formally within the week." I said nothing. "The market will stabilize if we appoint someone trusted," she continued. "And clearly, you're the only person in this firm whose credibility wasn't built on illusion." I studied her carefully. "And what happens to my pension?" "It vests, effective immediately. We'll also offer a formal apology and issue a public statement clearing your name." I stared out the window. The skyline looked the same as always. Cold steel. Bright clouds. But something about it felt different now. "I'll need full operational autonomy," I said. "Granted. I want full access to internal audit and legal." "Also granted. And I want my terms, every single one, documented and enforceable before I sign a thing." Eleanor nodded. "You'll have it in writing within 48 hours. I stood. "One more thing," I said before leaving. "I won't protect anyone. If I find rot under the floorboards, I'm tearing it up." "We're counting on that," she said softly. I walked out without shaking her hand. I didn't go home. I went to the lake again. This time, I walked slower. Because this wasn't revenge anymore. This was reclamation. They thought my story ended at 6 p.m. the night before my pension. But I was just getting started. The board ratified my return on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning at 8 a.m., I was in the corner office, the same one Bryce had filled with mahogany furniture and hollow language. I didn't bring flowers. I didn't bring boxes. I didn't even sit behind the desk. I walked the floor first. Not to be seen. To see. People noticed, of course. Their glances shifted quickly. A few nodded with tightly drawn faces. Others looked down, pretending to read emails that weren't open. Fear travels faster than truth. By 9 a.m., I had already replaced the head of internal audit and appointed a temporary general counsel, someone external, neutral, and unimpressed by Veriton's legacy. By 10:30, I convened my first closed-door executive session. Not a performance. Not a speech. Just 10 people around a table with nothing but water, legal pads, and my voice. I looked at each of them. Some had signed the memo recommending my termination. Some had remained silent. One looked genuinely ashamed. "I won't waste your time," I said. "You all know what this is. You're here because this company was caught misrepresenting its financials, attempting to silence accountability and retaliating against the only person who stood in its way." No one spoke. I leaned forward. "You have two choices. Help me fix it or walk out now." Silence. Then one person moved. Jeremy Wallace, former CFO. The one who had smiled at me 2 weeks ago while quietly forwarding the termination packet to legal. He stood. "I'm resigning," he said. I didn't stop him. He walked out. Just like that. And the mood shifted. I turned to the remaining 9. That's what self-preservation looks like. But if you're staying, this isn't about preserving anything. It's about excavation. We're going to dig until everything is visible. Then I handed each of them a folder. It wasn't performative. Each folder contained a preliminary summary of the firm's regulatory risk exposure based on the documentation I had already submitted to the SEC. I wasn't threatening them. I was showing them where we stood. No one argued. Because now, for the first time, there was a clear binary. Tell the truth or get out of the way. After the meeting, I spent the rest of the day with Celine. She had agreed to return under one condition, that she report directly to me and no one else. I'd accepted before she finished her sentence. "Where do we start?" she asked. "Start with every communication Bryce had in the last 90 days flagged as privileged or marked outside formal compliance channels. That's going to be a lot." "I know," I said. "That's why I want it sorted by patterns, frequency, language shifts, external threads." Celine didn't flinch. "Anything you want to avoid triggering?" "No," I said. "I want them to feel us moving." By the end of the day, we had retrieved over 400 flagged entries, most of which had gone through private Slack channels or unapproved devices. Some were benign. Some were defensive. But one thread caught my eye. It was a series of encrypted messages between Bryce and a consulting group we had never officially hired, Turn and Latch. Turn and Latch wasn't a real firm. It was a shell, one used by at least 3 Fortune 500 companies in the past to bury toxic assets in off-book investments. I'd flagged them internally last year when rumors of their practices surfaced. Legal had said it was irrelevant, but here it was. A direct line. I stared at the screen, my jaw locked tight. "Pull every asset transfer involving secondary funds over the past 12 months, I said to Celine. "Focus on anything involving off-ledger liquidity vehicles. If you need outside help, bring in analysts from anywhere but here." She nodded. "Lyra," she said quietly, "if this goes deep, how far are you willing to take it?" I didn't answer right away, because I already knew. All the way. That night, I stayed late. Not because I was trying to prove anything. I had no audience. No one left to impress. I stayed because I wanted to understand the exact shape of the rot. It wasn't personal anymore. Not just. This was a system problem. A culture problem. A leadership problem that had calcified into procedure, into language, into silence. They had built entire structures designed to bury risk under optimism and distraction. They hadn't just tried to erase me, they had tried to erase accountability itself. So I started tearing it apart. I dissolved 2 advisory boards that had existed solely for investor optics. I suspended all discretionary bonus approvals, pending external audit review. I froze outgoing capital movements on 5 flagged funds until we confirmed every cent. By Wednesday, the internal rumor mill had switched gears. The whispers weren't about the whistleblower anymore. They were about the reckoner. And I wasn't finished. Because on Thursday morning, something unexpected happened. I received a call from the Department of Justice. Not just SEC compliance review. A parallel inquiry. They wanted to speak, off record, confidential. Because the documents I'd provided had triggered an interagency referral. That changed everything. It meant potential criminal liability for executives, not just regulatory fines. I scheduled the meeting. Then I sat in silence for nearly an hour. Not from fear. From calculation. Because now the decisions I made wouldn't just shape Veritan's future. They would determine who walked free and who didn't walk away at all. The DOJ meeting took place in a federal building just off Holcomb Street, 3 floors up, behind a frosted glass door that didn't have a nameplate. They kept it informal on the surface. No courtroom, no cameras, no suits with visible tape recorders. Just 2 agents, a legal observer, and me. I didn't bring a lawyer. I didn't need one. Everything I said was already documented, time-stamped, and traceable. What I told them wasn't new, but how I told it was. See, written evidence is only half the story. The other half is the human chain, who knew when they knew what was said and what was intentionally left unsaid. When I laid out the timeline of Veritan's manipulation, asset misstatements, falsified fund-to-fund transactions, artificial stabilization of distressed vehicles, the agents didn't interrupt. They already had pieces. I gave them the structure. But it wasn't until I mentioned turn and latch that one of them, a man named Price, leaned forward. You're saying they used a shell firm to offload risky positions and conceal asset dilution? Yes. And the CEO signed off. Not alone. There were others. Price nodded, like a man who had just confirmed something he'd only suspected. We'll need those internal communications. You'll have them. He paused. Lyra, are you aware your reinstatement has already drawn pushback from Veritan's international stakeholders? I raised an eyebrow. I'm not here to please offshore shareholders. No, he agreed, but someone from your board is trying to cut a deal on your behalf. I stiffened. Name? He didn't answer right away. Just slid a folder across the table. I opened it. It was a memo, unsigned but traced back to internal comms, proposing a leadership restructuring agreement in exchange for limited liability cooperation with regulatory review. The language was slippery. The memo made it sound like I had offered to resign again, voluntarily, to restore market equilibrium. I hadn't, but someone had tried to make it look like I had. Eleanor's name wasn't on it. Someone else was moving pieces behind her. Someone I'd overlooked. When I left the building, I didn't go home. I didn't return to the office. I went to a bar in the financial district, the kind executives use when they want to be seen but not overheard. I waited in a back booth until 6:15 p.m. That's when Jace Whitmer walked in. Former head of corporate strategy. One of Bryce Langford's closest allies. Technically, he had resigned 2 weeks before my return, but unofficially, he'd never left. I knew he was still advising the board behind closed doors. And I knew he hated me. He spotted me immediately. Didn't even pretend to be surprised. Lyra, he said, sliding into the booth. Didn't expect you here. No, I said. You expected me on a plane out of the country by now. He didn't deny it. What do you want? You tried to use my name, I said calmly, in a proposal to negotiate your own liability. Come on. You know how this works. It's not personal. It's always personal, I interrupted, especially when it comes wrapped in plausible deniability. He tilted his glass. You think the DOJ is your ally? You think you'll survive the market if you tear this company apart from the inside? I'm not tearing it apart, I said. I'm giving it a fighting chance.
He leaned in.
No one wants an ethics crusader in charge during a storm, Lyra. They want a cleanup crew who knows when to shut up and cash out. I smiled, slow, unamused. Then you've mistaken me for someone who's still afraid of losing something. He opened his mouth, but I was already sliding a flash drive across the table. What's this? An exact transcript of every communication you had with Turn and Latch from a company-issued device, including the ones you deleted.
His face changed.
If I go down, I said, you're going with me. And I'm not bluffing. You know I don't bluff. He stared at the drive, then looked at me like he finally saw the version of me that had been waiting 21 years to stop asking for permission. Have a good night, Jace. I stood and walked out.
I didn't need his reaction.
I needed his silence. The next morning, I returned to the office to find Eleanor already waiting. She had the memo in her hand. "I didn't authorize this," she said before I even sat down. "I know, but someone did. We'll find out who." "I already know who." She looked at me for a long time, then sat down. For once, she didn't hide the fatigue in her eyes. "I fought for you to return because I thought you could stabilize us," she said. "But this is war." "No," I said softly. "This is surgery, and we're not done cutting yet." That afternoon, I met with the broader staff, everyone who'd felt the tremor but hadn't been told what fault line caused it. No flash, no slogans, just facts. I explained the regulatory review. I explained the DOJ inquiry. I explained what would come next. There were no promises. Only one truth. This company forgot what it means to be accountable. That ends now. They didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just watched. But by the time I walked out of that room, I could feel something shift. Not fear, recognition. And maybe, just maybe, respect. They always think the end will be loud. That revenge comes with fireworks, headlines, or a dramatic walkout. But real closure doesn't make a sound. It happens in sealed courtrooms, in corrected filings, in the final signatures on papers no one outside will ever read. It happens when the people who tried to erase you have to face what you've become, calm, unshaken, and entirely beyond their reach. The DOJ's formal inquiry became a case. And the case had names. 3, to start with. Bryce Langford, for corporate fraud and regulatory misrepresentation. Jace Whitmer, for wire fraud, document destruction, and obstruction of justice. And Lauren Greaves, former general counsel, for knowingly approving off-ledger agreements that concealed fiduciary risk. I didn't gloat. I didn't leak it to the press. I simply ensured that their resignations were filed before their indictments landed. Eleanor and I had our last board meeting 2 weeks later. She'd chosen to step down, quietly, honorably. She wasn't guilty, but she was tired. She'd fought long enough, and she'd done what mattered most. She made room for the fight to continue without her. "I still don't know why you came back," she said as we sat across from each other one last time. I thought about that for a long moment, because they wanted to make me smaller than what I built, and I needed to show them I was what I built. She nodded. "You did more than that." I didn't respond. Some truths don't need agreement to be real. After she left, I sat alone in the executive suite and stared at the glass walls I once thought would never hold me. Everything looked the same, but none of it felt familiar anymore, which was why I made my final decision the next morning. I didn't want to be CEO forever. I wasn't here to hold power. I was here to reset it, to rewire the machine that nearly destroyed me and had already destroyed better people who never got a second chance. So I called a press conference, not to speak to the world, to speak to the ones still watching quietly, those still playing the game, still waiting for someone to show them that silence isn't safety and power isn't permanent. In front of 100 cameras, I said this. I was fired 15 hours before my pension vested after 21 years of service. It was legal, but it wasn't right. So I fought. Not because I needed the money, but because I knew exactly how many people they would do it to next if I didn't. This company made choices. I made mine. Today, I announce my resignation as interim CEO of Veriton Equity Partners. Effective immediately, my successor will be Anjali Rao, our new Chief Operating Officer, a woman who never compromised her values, even when the walls closed in. I am walking away, not in defeat, but in completion. Because the system I inherited is not the one I'm leaving behind. And I'm not the woman they fired. Not anymore. They asked questions. I didn't answer. That part of the story was theirs to finish. I stepped out of the building at exactly 9:04 a.m., 6 weeks to the day after I had watched Veriton stock drop by over $1 billion. The markets had stabilized. Our reputation hadn't fully recovered, but the bleeding had stopped. New compliance protocols were in place. Investor confidence was creeping back up. And the media had moved on to newer scandals, louder ones, easier ones. But the people who mattered, they hadn't forgotten. I got calls. Emails. Quiet messages from other women, other executives, other whistleblowers who saw what happened and finally felt like they weren't alone. That was the real legacy. Not the company. Not the payout. Not the headlines. It was the reminder that sometimes just surviving isn't enough. Sometimes you have to come back. Not to reclaim what they took, but to prove they never had the power to take you in the first place. I don't work in skyscrapers anymore. These days, I consult, quietly. I help others navigate the same storms I survived. I read more.
Sleep more.
I go on walks by the lake without checking the time. My pension vested. Every last cent. But more than that, my silence never did. And that is what they'll remember most.